we like to talk about abundance, which is one form of unconditional love, that then further refines down to wealth, which then further refines down to cash. And it happens in the present moment. It doesn't happen later, and it didn't happen before. It's only happening now. And all the cash you have at your disposal right now, you are manifesting it. You didn't manifest it past tense, and you're not going to manifest it future tense. You're manifesting it right now, and it's a continuing, ongoing manifesting, because this is a hologram, and the hologram is constantly forming and reforming and forming and reforming, and it's always happening in the present moment. So the difference between making money is it's very much driven by the past, very much planning into the future, very much doing the right thing in order to get to the right place where you want to go and have the thing you want to have later. Manifesting cash happens now. Now, if you want more cash than what you have, then you have the ability to imagine it like you do with everything else that you manifest, which is what's going on all the time. And in your imagining, then you begin to play with it, and you see yourself having more of it.
Welcome to the Delicious Alignment Podcast, high-vibing conversations with me, your host, Rhonda Ryder. Before I introduce today's guest, I want you to know about a brand new free gift I have for you. It's a 20-minute guided visualization on abundance that takes you on a wonderful adventure, and I think you are going to love it. I know I love it. It's really different, and it's pretty powerful. At least that's what people in my program have told me. This free guided visualization was created during one of my group coaching programs. Everyone loved it so much and found it so effective that I thought, why not make it available to more people? I believe visualization is one of the keys to unlocking the abundance residing within all of us. You can go to deliciousalignment.com/abundance to receive your free gift. This link will also be in the show notes. I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest, Frank W. Butterfield. Frank is a master channel who has helped thousands experience powerful shifts in consciousness through his delicious work with the Communion of Light, a group of non-physical beings who speak through him using a single voice. The Communion of Light shares a consistent and powerful message of freedom, that we create our own reality and that we can joyfully remember who we really are as creators, and that life comes together much simpler and easier than we've taught ourselves to believe. I'm also really excited because I get to meet Frank Butterfield in person at his live event in Orlando called Liberate Your Abundance on 11/11. Join me if you wish. It is going to be so much fun, and we've got a group of us going. All right, so let's jump into the interview. Hello, Frank.
Hi, Rhonda. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you. I'm really excited to speak with you today.
It's really awesome to be here.
There's so much buzz going around about you in my little circles. Tell us what you do and who Frank is and who Paul is and the Communion of Light and anything you want to say.
Okay. Well, my name is Frank W. Butterfield. I live in Daytona Beach, Florida. I am a channel and have been channeling since 1990. I am also an author. I've written 96 self-published fiction novels, and they're all channeled, by the way. I've done that since I've lived here in Daytona Beach, which has been about 7 years. My life is, I've done a lot of different things. I've been a real person and had a real job, and then finally decided I didn't need to do that anymore. I've been working for myself, having a business, if you will, as a channel since about 2006. And I love doing this. I love working with the people that I get to work with and who I get to meet. And I love being able to kind of sit aside and let another voice talk through me and do all the work for me. That's really my favorite parts of it. So Paul is the name of the voice that speaks through me. So it's a single voice that speaks for a collective idea, which is the Communion of Light. They like to say there's 10,000 of them, but that doesn't really mean anything. It's just a big number. They are here to remind us of who we really are. They're not teachers and they're not healers. They're reminders. And they're very clear about not being teachers, and they're just reminding us of who we really are and where our power is, which is in the present moment, that we are freedom loving beings. And if you're interested or drawn to what they're talking about, you'll find that likely freedom is really big. They like to say freedom
Mhm.
is your North Star, probably, that you're very interested in wealth, not just money, but actual wealth. And that they like to call, and they'll explain it better than I can, but they like to call this time that most anybody who's interested in this happens to be living through, they'll call it the bonus period, where you're aware of who you are as a manifesting being of light and aware of the fact that you're opting to do this and you've chosen to stay alive. They do like to say, and they explain this much better than I do, about how almost everyone that they ever connect with has some sort of like, there was a time when they almost didn't make it and they chose to stay here for whatever reason. And it doesn't make all of us special or set us apart, but it's just kind of part of what seems to be what comes into focus with this group.
Wait, so can you explain that a little bit more?
Well, I know I can speak for myself.
Right. When you say the who are we talking about that were chose to came here and almost didn't make it? Like what?
That anybody who really has any, the way they'll say it is, if you're interested in what we're saying and are not offended by it,
Yeah.
then probably the case is that you have an experience at some point in the past where you kind of like might have been going around a curve, and then there's, one version of you went off the curve and off the cliff, and that was it. And the other version didn't, and you're in the version that didn't. And it was a conscious choice that you decided, I'm not ready to leave yet. I want to do this. And for my own self, I can pinpoint a very specific moment when that happened.
Yeah.
And that's when kind of, it's not when I started channeling, but it's kind of what set the stage for it to happen. Uh,
Yeah. Is it sort
and
of like for me, I had a car accident and I saw the big truck coming. This was, a very long time ago. And because I was having like suicidal thoughts, and then I saw the big truck coming, there's nothing I could do is going to hit me. And I thought, oh no, I changed my mind. I really don't want to go right now. I'd like to stick around. I changed my mind. And
well,
that's
yeah,
literally what happened. I mean, in my mind. Yeah.
yeah, no, exactly. No, that
Yeah.
is, no, I would say that's literally what happened.
Yeah.
I know for myself, I did the same thing. As the kids would say these days, I was ideating. And I met somebody who I'm pretty sure was an angel, which is a word they won't use, but and I don't normally use, but I don't know how else to describe this person, who basically said you should go ahead and do that, which was very shocking. And they said, well, look, when you tell somebody don't, oftentimes they'll actually do it anyway. And so he was like, just do it. And I did it. And when I did it, I did not do it right.
And
And
when you say you did it, what is
I
it?
was trying to kill myself.
Okay.
And so I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm kind of speaking in code. Let me try
No,
that again.
no, no. I'm very good at clarity, like getting the,
Oh, yes.
yes. So that I always ask a lot of questions. That's why I like doing podcasts. So
Yeah,
don't
that's
worry about
awesome.
it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I know this is kind of a touchy subject for some people, but
But
my
it's an
guess is,
important subject. Important
yeah, I
subject.
agree. But what ended up happening is I woke up the next morning and this guy showed up at my apartment and kind of talked me through all sorts of things I don't remember anything about. And it was 6 months later after that that I started channeling. Um,
Mm.
so, but I knew what channeling was. I had seen a made for TV movie called Out on a Limb, which was Shirley MacLaine produced one of her own books.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
it
I know
really
it.
was like,
I read it. I'm aging myself here, but who cares? And yeah,
well,
loved it.
and when I read that book, I was like, there was something. Well, actually, when I saw the movie, I was like, there's something I want here. Like, I don't know if I want to be Shirley MacLaine, or I want to live in Malibu, or I want something. And so, and then that kind of led to one thing after another, and then it took about 3 years, and then all of a sudden, I was channeling. So,
Yeah. Wow. And we're so glad you did. I have to tell you that I've been listening to Abraham for 30 years, listening to mostly Abraham, and then been on other journeys of started out reading all kinds of metaphysical books. But something about when I started listening to you, and it's only been since May, and I can't even put my finger on it. I was like thinking this morning, what is it? But it's like in a lot of ways, communion of light is saying the same things, but in a lot of ways, I'm hearing it. It sounds different sometimes, and I'm hearing it different, but it has given me, like you said, freedom. I have gotten such another big bump, up leveling of this feeling of freedom, and especially around money.
Oh,
Uh,
awesome.
yeah, what I keep saying is there is no later. There is no later. Because I feel like in my life, a lot of times, yeah, I've had big successes and then big losses and wonderful career as a copywriter, but there's so many ups and downs and so much fear around money. It's something that you're saying or your vibration of what you're saying. So I just have a lot more freedom and even love in my relationships. So let's explore. We're going to bring Paul in so everyone else can experience the communion of light. But I just wanted to say that. And I know my circle of friends, we're all listening to you every day. You usually almost you do something and we listen to the recordings or we go live and ask questions. And
Right.
yeah, people are having these little chats online about what the day's message was. So yeah, I'm excited.
Well, there was
Yeah.
something you said that I kind of wanted to point to, that I think is important. So when I first started channeling, my basis was Jane Roberts and Seth. I had read about the time I discovered the Seth material. Jane Roberts had passed away a couple of years earlier, and her publisher, Prentice Hall, was republishing all of her books. And so it was really weird. I would go to the bookstore and there'd be suddenly a new Jane Roberts book. And then I'd read that and I'd go to the bookstore and there would be another new one because they were bringing them out one at a time. And so that was wild. But also, then that led me, but it was about 20 years later, is when I found Abraham. And I did go to one, um, it's a very long story, but to keep it really short, I went to one Abraham workshop in San Antonio with a bunch of friends of mine. At the time, I was living in Dallas, and we all went down, and it was an amazing experience. And as soon as Esther walked in on the stage, and I'd been channeling already for like 15 years at that point. As soon as Esther walked out on the stage, I was like, oh, this is how you do this with all these people. And I don't even know how to explain what that means, but that was what I thought. And then, as I like to say, then Paul sent me to Abraham school and to pick up the language because I didn't have that language. And so you'll hear a lot of things that are reminiscent of Abraham, but if you listen, you'll realize that it's actually different, but it's very similar, and it's easy to kind of go back and forth between the same. But one big distinction that they'll draw is that Abraham is a teacher. There's no question they're teaching, and it's a classroom. And so in a classroom, when a question is asked, then the answer is often generalized. And if you'll notice, like in the morning calls that you're referring to, the questions are always very personal. And if they
Mm-hmm.
are generalized, they'll say, okay, we're going to subbox and we're talking to everybody. But then they'll like, now we're talking to you specifically, and this is the thing we're talking to you about, which for a variety of reasons can't and doesn't happen in an Abraham workshop. But I love Abraham, and it's funny because although I've never met Esther, I literally feel like I know everyone else who has either worked for her or worked around her. This happened a while ago, and there's some people have come and gone since then, and I don't really keep up anymore. But that was an interesting experience when I first kind of started doing what I'm doing now. I just met all these people who were connected to that organization, and I learned so much after
Mm-hmm.
spending time with them, which was awesome. So
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
big connection between all three. I always consider like Jane Roberts, with all apologies to Esther, but Jane Roberts is like my grandmother, and Esther's kind of like my mom. And then because I feel like I'm in kind of an ancestry of sorts or
Okay. Can
lineage.
I be your sister?
Oh, sure, absolutely,
Oh
absolutely,
yeah. And we'll have a family gathering in November
yeah, awesome.
at your event. Yes, I love that. I definitely hear some things that are so similar. I feel like I hear new things as well. Especially, I love how when somebody's asking you a question and they might say, "I was listening to this other person," and your response to them, and Paul says, "I'm responding to that person. You're not that person, so you can't always apply what you're saying to somebody else." Although I do feel like of course, we are all learning from every question and answer exchange with you, with Paul. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I would like to talk about abundance with Paul. Would that be okay?
Oh yeah, sure. You ready to rock and roll
Uh,
right now?
yeah. Let's go
Okay,
for it.
well then hold on just a second. Yes, indeed. And we are quite pleased and quite honored to be connecting with you in all the ways that we are doing so here today. And we are wondering, what questions do you have for us at this time?
Yes, thank you so much. First question, actually, I've taken from the book Spinning Straw into Gold. What's the difference between making money and creating money?
Well, there's actually a couple of distinctions in that question. So, since that book, which is many years ago, we've actually kind of taken another route where we talk about money versus cash, which doesn't refer to currency. We're referring to the fact that there's money, which is abstract, and cash, which is what you have in your bank account and what you can spend and use right now, what an economist would call M1, the thing that's immediately disposable and available. So, making money, the way we draw the distinction is making money versus manifesting cash. So, making money is tied to, generally, not for everybody, but generally tied to the idea that there's a specific action that needs to be done through a specific particular kind of way of doing it, that then once you've done it, then hopefully, if you're really lucky and have done all the work and you did everything you're supposed to, will actually then eventually, some point down the line, at some point when you finally get there, when it's finally done and you've crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's and everything is finished and you've done all the work you're supposed to do, and then God finally took over, then you will make money.
Mm-hmm.
Manifesting cash is actually what's happening right now with the dollar bills, pound notes, euro notes that are in your wallet at this moment. That's what you're doing. And manifesting is not an action that's set apart, like I'm going to go manifest this, as opposed to doing something else with it, because you're manifesting everything. So manifesting cash is basically, that's a form, and we like to take these, we're threading it a little thinly here, but we like to talk about abundance, which is one form of unconditional love, that then further refines down to wealth, which then further refines down to cash. And it happens in the present moment. It doesn't happen later, and it didn't happen before. It's only happening now. And all the cash you have at your disposal right now, you are manifesting it. You didn't manifest it past tense, and you're not going to manifest it future tense. You're manifesting it right now, and it's a continuing, ongoing manifesting, because this is a hologram, and the hologram is constantly forming and reforming and forming and reforming, and it's always happening in the present moment. So the difference between making money is it's very much driven by the past, very much planning into the future, very much doing the right thing in order to get to the right place where you want to go and have the thing you want to have later. Manifesting cash happens now. Now, if you want more cash than what you have, then you have the ability to imagine it, like you do with everything else that you manifest, which is what's going on all the time. And in your imagining, then you begin to play with it, and you see yourself having more of it, or hear yourself talking about having more of it, or hold it in your hands, whatever you'll be doing with it, or have a plastic card that you run around swiping or tapping onto devices, and then you get things in exchange. And you begin to feel your way into it. And our suggestion is always to use what feels better about these things and put your attention on it for a little while, until you feel the expansion of it then begin to evolve up and out of you. That's the manifesting that we talk about. That's intentional manifesting. Now, we don't want to belabor the point too much, but there's another kind of manifesting, which is called default manifesting. That's what we call it. Now, that's going to be different than what Abraham says. This is, we don't, Abraham will generally say, or has in the past generally said, default manifesting is the stuff that happens when you're not paying attention. And we would say there is no such thing as not paying attention. It's just that you may not think you're paying attention. But default manifesting is, and we go through a whole list of things, it's what is happening when you turn on the water and it comes out of the spigot, or when you flip a switch and the electricity works and the lamp comes on, or most significantly, when you breathe in and out. Because people will come to us and say, I'm not really doing good with manifesting. And we'll say, oh, so are you not breathing? Because if you're not breathing, you don't do anything else. Breathing, for the rules you've set up for your body, you have to breathe. So you're manifesting what you're breathing in, and you're manifesting all the stuff, the gunk that you're breathing out. And you're doing it perfectly, powerfully, amazingly all the time. And the same is true with cash. You can lie to yourself and say, I don't do this very well. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how this works. But that's a measure of perception. It's not about manifesting at all, because manifesting is always perfect. There's no way to get better at it. You can have more. You can always have more. But the way that happens is you allow it to happen by simply imagining it and then getting out of the way.
Hmm. Yes. So
As, and we'll just add one
yeah.
last little thing. As opposed to making money, which has plans and measured capacities and abilities and things implemented that have to be done, there's always kind of a rule about how it's going to work, and you're going to be lucky if it actually happens. Manifesting is not luck. It doesn't require faith or trust or confidence or anything like that. It happens all the time, and you're either in alignment with having what you're wanting and noticing it and seeing it, or you're not in alignment but still having it, just not as much or in the way that you want.
Yeah.
And that's all a matter of shifting your stance about how you look at things.
Yeah. So what comes to mind is, say I have a project that I'm doing, like I'm going to do this online course. And the way I used to do things is write down how many people you need to get in the course, blah, 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 all that, the measurements and all of that, and the goals. Like, I don't do that anymore. Since the last couple of years, I'm just following what lights me up. I want to do this podcast. I'm going to do that. And every once in a while, I'll take a course on podcasting. And then I get all twirled up again because they're telling me to do all this stuff that doesn't necessarily feel good. Like, I don't want to spend 3 hours a day on Instagram. I just want to do what I want to do. I want to have fun.
You can be in resistance to it. You can have opinions about it. You could be doing all the things you listed. You were not creating when you were doing what you were doing. All
Yeah.
that you were doing is that we would just suggest in the example that you gave, is the only thing you were really doing that we would suggest you not do is that you are making other people the arbiters of your experience. That they are the ones who know what to do and they will tell you what to do. Now you can do that. You can set people up to actually do that. And you could say intentionally, I want someone to show up in my life and tell me exactly how this works. And this someone will. And then it's up to you to decide whether you're going to use it or not. But that's an in the moment thing. There's nothing wrong with reading books or going to experts or anything like
Yeah.
that. It's just whether or not you're in alignment with having what it is that you're having, or doing what it is that you're doing, which, and this is the part we haven't said, this is, as you've heard us say many times, this is at the heart of everything. We recommend whatever you do. Doesn't matter what it is, and it doesn't matter why you got here, and it doesn't matter what this is about or what the motivations were. It really doesn't. Those are irrelevant. We recommend that you do what feels better. That, from our perspective, that's what we call intuition. Now, intuition oftentimes is described as being the understanding of the plan that will unfold, and then your job is to follow the plan. From our perspective, that's not what intuition is at all. What we see over and over and over again with our physical friends is that there's just a thought that feels better in the thinking, but in the thinking, not when thought, then I'll feel better. But now as I'm thinking it, it feels better, which doesn't sound like much, but it's a huge distinction.
Mm-hmm.
Same way with what you're doing, what feels better in the doing, as opposed to what will feel better later when you do it. The really simple way to think about this is that we've always said that everyone does everything they do and says and thinks because it feels better. The difference is, will it feel better later or will it feel better now? And when you're using intuition, the payoff is immediate and you don't have to wait.
Yeah.
But we also like to draw the distinction between, and this is a semantic thing, but the semantics really points to what we're talking about. There's a difference between feeling good and feeling better, because sometimes feeling better doesn't feel good, and that can be confusing. Our friends Abraham do a really good job of talking about this, how, for example, and we sort of refer to their emotional guidance scale, but not too much. And we don't say that it's actually accurate in the sense that it always followed those steps. It's just a format of how to think about emotions. So from despair to sadness, for example, sadness actually feels better than despair. Anger feels better than sadness. Irritation feels better than anger. Boredom feels better than irritation. Contentment feels better than boredom. On and on and on. And then you get up into happiness and content and joy and delight, and words that we use that are not on that chart. But the thing we mostly want to point out is that when you follow what feels better and do what feels better, that's your alignment. And the alignment is with who you are in your entirety. not just what you're doing about this one particular project, but the fullness of who you are. Because while you're quite capable of narrowing your focus down to very specific points, you're not just that one point floating in a sea of kind of like general vagueness. The entirety of who you are is happening all at the same time. And so your intuition is the point, the thought that feels better, the word that feels better, the doing that feels better, that's in alignment with everything, not just the one thing. And that can be confusing because many of our physical friends are very smart and have taught themselves how to be really good project managers, as just a general word. This is how you determine the scale, you do the project, you know what the goals are, you do the work, you get it done, and then you get the payoff. And so it seems like you just stay on the track and the plan, you work the plan, and the plan will work itself for you. And that's logic, and that logic can be very powerful. And you've heard this before. Logic is for baking cakes and building bridges.
Mhm.
But rarely are you just baking cakes, and rarely are you just building bridges. And it's good to have a recipe because cake baking is a chemistry experiment. So it's good to have a recipe so that you have generally the right proportions for the different ingredients. But when you bring your intuition to the table, which is under logic, around logic, on top of logic, inside of logic, logic is one of the tools that is an aspect of the metaphysical you that you are. When you bring the intuition, the metaphysics to the table, when you're baking a cake, then you can actually, if you go to the store and feel your way into which is the bag of flour that I want to buy, which is the bag of sugar that I want to buy, then you will find yourself with the right flour and the right sugar really easily. And your cake will be even better than what you were expecting. You can still bake a cake without doing that, and it comes out just fine. But just fine is kind of one of the things that is no longer, for most of our physical friends, this isn't always the case, and it's not a goal, it's not an aspiration. It's just that for most people who are, because no one really comes to us who doesn't understand metaphysics, if you've noticed. You've never heard us give a basic introduction to the nature of metaphysics.
Yeah, I was looking for it.
And there is no, and you won't find one.
Because I wanted to ask you some questions on the basics of but yeah, you're right.
Yeah, because very rarely, we're just not good ghosts to come talk to if you don't understand what metaphysics are. And now there are people who shut up and said, I don't understand what this is. And we'll say, yeah, that's what you think. You don't understand the words. You don't know the language, but you do understand what all this is. This is, at the risk of sounding, again, as though we're some sort of special offset group, and we're not. This is kind of a more advanced experience, but that doesn't make it better. It just makes it different.
Yeah. So when I'm here listening to you, would this be correct? Say somebody wants to write a book. They go and they take a couple of courses on how to step by step write your book. And you're saying that, yes, great. Nothing wrong with that. Taking a course, finding out, but then just add your intuition to it. If the steps that they're telling you to do don't feel good, don't do it. Do the steps that feel good to you.
Right, that feel better.
That feel better.
We'd recommend that. But also, before that, there, you skipped over something that we consider to be really important. What will you get as a result of having written the book? So this is what another teacher would call the law of assumption. You want to move into the assumption of the idea. You've got a book in your hand. It's out in all the bookstores. People are buying it. It's falling off the shelves. Why? What is that for you? And not motivation, but what do you want to experience as a result of having a book that's flying off the shelves? Start there, because that's the whole point of writing a book. Now, you may discover that you're not really that interested. It's nice if that happens, but you're more interested in actually writing the book. Or maybe we have come across a couple of physical friends who do this. You're more interested in publishing a book than actually writing one. Because the publishing, which may, for you as an author, may not seem like anything interesting, but for some people, they just love all of that. There are other physical friends we've come across who they'll write a book so they can edit their own work. And then they discover, oh, actually, I'm really good at editing. I don't really care about the content, but I want the structure to be really smooth and straight line. So that's what you want to find out. Why do I want to go to all the trouble of writing a book? Go ahead, do so.
Having listened to you many times in the past few months, so the distinction between, yes, what is it that you want, but also not being attached to that outcome, like you're.
Well, and right, and that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking
Yeah.
about here is, if you're going to theoretically throw out the example of, you take a couple of courses and then the point is, like, don't follow what they say just because they say it and they're the experts, but follow what feels better, follow your intuition. Yeah, we agree with that. But let's go back to point zero. Why are you taking the courses in the first place? What is that even for? That's what we were asking. That's what we're bringing to the table.
Right.
Yes. Now, as far as attachment, which is what you're bringing to the table, right? Not being
Right, because
attached
that's
to
what
the
I
other.
was, when you said that, that's where I went, like, oh, I want all of these outcomes,
Well, then sit in
which,
them and feel them.
yes.
And as you feel
Yeah.
them, see, the thing is that attachment kind of goes away if what you're doing, again, quoting another teacher, if what you're doing is living in the assumption. That's something said by Neville Goddard, who we quote every now and then, because that's a really good explanation of what this is actually about. We have called this pointing the arrow, looking for where the target is, and then bringing the target towards you, or casting a line like you're fishing and you reel it in, bring it in, instead of having it be way over there, this thing that eventually I'll get to. You want to be in it, to be in the having of what you're wanting. And then what ends up happening is logic begins to fall apart here. Now, this doesn't mean that logic won't come in to help you, but logic falls apart, and then resources, people, situations, circumstances begin to gather around you. Rising up is the way we like to call that, because you're manifesting from within yourself. There's not anything coming at you in a physical sense. So they rise up to help you, and then you begin to refine and define. And so contrast happens. Things that you don't like, things that you do like, but things that you don't like also will happen, and it helps you make new decisions about what you're doing and where you're going and what you're wanting more of. Trying not to be attached is, of course, its own form of detachment, right? That's, any Buddhist will tell you that. Trying to be non-resistant is its own form of resistance, because it's okay if you're attached. It's just that when you feel the pressure of it and you feel the anxiety of it, then take a deep breath and realize all is well. And it doesn't really matter how this all works out, because everything is always working out for you. And everyone everywhere is always helping you. You're not really adrift at sea or lost. You may believe you are, but if you take a deep breath and spend a few moments being with yourself and looking around and paying attention to the perfection of the space you're in, you'll see how all is well in the present moment. And then what happens in the future becomes less and less important. And also, you can spend time in the place you want to be in, because there is the reason why you know about this. When you start asking yourself, what is this for? Why am I doing this? What will I have as a result? That's the question we like to ask. What will I have as a result of having this thing that I'm wanting? There's another version of you
Mm-hmm.
that's sitting off to the side, actually doing the very thing you're imagining. That's where the imagining is coming from. That's where the images and the thoughts and the feelings are coming from, and how you're trying to integrate them into yourself in the present moment.
Okay,
Which
well,
we just
yeah.
opened another can of worms. We're
Yeah,
not
you just
play with.
you opened up the versioning can of worms, which you know I was going to ask you anyway. But before we go there, I just want to say I heard you talking to somebody in one of the courses. They were thinking about the future, the outcome, and you were no. Yeah,
And that's an important thing.
yeah,
There's really no way to generalize a lot of the things that we say, because they're very specific. But
yeah.
generally speaking, we think one of the things you're pointing to is, we were having a conversation with someone who is highly resistant to actually even having what they're wanting. You may not know that, because you may not be aware of this, a very long ongoing conversation with this person about this topic. But this person is highly resistant to having what they're wanting, and they do believe, and the opinions will come in and swarm around little, as like angry bees, to tell this person, you cannot actually let go. You have to work hard. And if you don't work hard, you're going to get in a lot of trouble. And that's a lot of what we were pointing to. So that's part, that's why we say we're not teachers, we're reminders.
Mm-hmm.
We're not healers, because you're not broken. You don't need healing from us. You're actually perfect as you are. And that's a lot of what these conversations are about. They sound like they're about other things, but we're almost always pointing back to the truth of who you are right now, not what's going to happen later, but what's happening now.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to talk about imagination and then ask you what is versioning, because what you're pointing to a lot in this conversation is using your imagination. I had a private session with you. You mentioned spend more time there, see myself there, feel what are the feelings you will feel once you have that or once you are experiencing that. So, which I love because I love that whole thing of imagination and visualization. So, can you tell me more about that imagination and visualization?
Well, again, there's no way to talk about imagining, and we use the word imagining like the gerund instead of a thing imagination, because imagining is an ongoing, like manifesting. So everything arises out of imagining. Everything. That's how you have everything you're looking at, hearing, listening, touching, tasting, smelling. At this red hot minute, it's all rising up out of your imagining. And it's manifesting in this hologram. So it's not a tool, it's actually what you're doing all the time. It's actually so imagining, manifesting, thinking, versioning are all synonyms for the same thing. They're
Like
all exact.
breathing. It's like breathing. You're doing it all the time.
You're doing it all the time. Well, and breathing, actually, if you notice, you're not always breathing. There are pauses between breaths, but you're always imagining. Although, if you meditate a lot, you can, as any good meditator will tell you, when you start meditating a lot, you start becoming aware of the fact that there's a lot of empty space between thoughts. But that's another conversation for another day. So it's not as though you're always thinking, always imagining, always versioning, except for the part where you are. And so we want to draw a distinction between who you are as an essential being of light, as opposed to who you are as a manifesting being of light. And this conversation that is happening between you and Frank and anyone listening or reading or watching is happening between and amongst manifesting beings of light. But the essential beingness of who you are has manifesting as an aspect, but manifesting doesn't define your essential nature. It's kind of outside of the scope of much of what we talk about. We're always talking about manifesting and having, because one of the things we're reminding you of is that you can have what you're wanting right now. You need not wait. And you do, in fact, have what you want right now. And that leads us into versioning. So when we use the word version, we're talking about what other people call parallel selves. But we've taken that and gone even deeper with it. And we talk about how versioning is really becoming aware of the fact that everything that you are aware of through your physical idea of self, which would be through the aegis of a body, it's all extensions of your mind. It's all happening in this hologram. The hologram with your two physical eyes looks like, if you just go through the sensory stuff, what you can actually see, not photographs, not what you know is above you, and not what you know is below you based upon what you've seen elsewhere, but what you actually can see with your eyes right now is actually very small. In terms of how big you think it could be, it's actually very, very small. It's only as big as it needs to be.
This blows my mind every time I hear you say it. So you're saying, like, I'm in my office now, and so my hologram is this big. That's it right now.
Exactly.
Like
And then when you
if
go
I look
out,
out the window, I'm instantaneously manifesting the yard that I
indeed,
do every
indeed,
day. Yeah.
indeed. And when you put your foot on the ground, it becomes solid for the purpose of holding your foot. One of the things that we love to say is that we're almost always wrong about everything we're saying, except for the part where we're almost always right. And that contradiction right there is the essence of metaphysics. Logically, that doesn't make any fucking sense.
Right.
But metaphysically, that's the essence. There's a great paradox. That's what we call it, the great paradox. You are an individual, but your individuality is an idea in your mind where you are at one with yourself. And you're not just one individual, you're a lot. You're the table and the chair and the window and the potted plant and the painting and everything else you see, hear, taste, touch, and smell. And you're also multiple versions of all these things. And when it comes to versioning, we've heard, someone will say, well, there's parallel universes and there's an infinite number. And we always say, there's not really an infinite number, but it kind of is approaching infinity because it's just an awful lot. And the analogy we love the most is grains of sand at the beach. You can, if you wanted to, count all the grains of sand at the beach, but it would take a really long time and it's a very large number. And you could approximate, you could, figure out like how much cubic sand there is, and then you could measure one's part and then multiply that and be like, it's probably quadrillions or something like that. That's just one beach. So it's not really infinite, and we're kind of quibbling, but there's a reason why we say it's not infinite, because you're constantly manifesting. And so here in this conversation, for example, there's just between you and Frank, there are 4 versions of this conversation happening right now. There's you. This is just within the narrow confines of observable reality. There's you, your version of Frank, and Frank's version of you. And we're not even counting ourselves because we're kind of interlopers. So there's 4 versions, but then there's all the different turns, the questions you didn't ask and the questions you did ask, the ways in which Frank answered the questions and didn't answer the questions, the ways in which we have said things and not said things that have spun off all these different versions. And that's like, let's say 1,600 since this recording started. That's not really a lot. It sounds like a lot, but it's not
why
really.
does it feel like there? I mean, I've heard you say that where I'm in and out
Oh, indeed.
of this body.
Right.
So it's like, I think, like last night I slept in my bed, and yesterday I was here, I was working, I went out for a little while, but you're saying I wasn't actually physically in this body the whole time.
Well, there's actually 2 different ways to answer that question. Remember the paradox,
Mm-hmm.
and remember that we're getting this wrong. And there's actually no accurate way to describe this because we have to use the linear nature of language in order to talk about it, which puts it into straight lines, and there's nothing straight line about this. But with that caveat said,
Yeah.
all the things you just talked about didn't happen. The only thing that has ever happened in your experience is what is happening right now. However, there are versions of you that you're referring to that are bringing you the tales of what happened. But so that's one way of answering this. But if we narrow this down to, again, just this one narrow reality, this is what you're referring to. So in this conversation, and we're not trying to embarrass you, since we started talking, this is when Frank was talking, it was a little bit different. But as you well know, and you're aware of it, you're thinking about it. The energy between Frank and between us is very different, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes, even though you're really good at looking at the camera, right?
Mm-hmm.
You go away. We can see you going away.
Mm-hmm.
That we don't see anything. We don't have eyes. And Frank doesn't see anything like this either. But what we talk about is the fact that when you start daydreaming, you exit physical reality and it collapses. And then when you need it back, you go back and you have it. And then you have a backstory. Let's say if you're gone for like 3 minutes, you have a backstory that covers the 3 minutes that inserts itself. If you begin to pay really close attention, you will notice that there are things that you remember that you don't really have a sense memory of doing, but they happened. And there's some things you have a sense memory of and some things you don't. This gets very, very, but this is a very fine hair to split. It can be interesting, but the relevant part is what we're trying to remind you of is the flexibility that's innate, inherent in your physical reality. It's not defined. You are not an alien thrown into this chaotic place. You are manifesting all of this, and you don't manifest it for very long periods of time. The other thing we'll say is that when someone says, I'm afraid of death, one of the things, not always and not every time, but one of the things we'll often say is, but you've only been alive for well, in your case, we'll say, you've only been alive, and don't count us. We're very bad at minutes and time and things like that. But you've only been alive for about 6 minutes. And you died and then resurrected. Now, it's very dramatic language. But what really happened is you went away and then you came back. There is no such thing as death. Just because you can observe a decaying body, so to kind of bring it to a place that's really easy to talk about, like there's a dead bug on the sidewalk. that bug is dead. No, the bug is not dead. The bug went off to go do other bug things. It went to go find another body. And in fact, bugs do this really well. They don't really care, and they'll pop and pop and pop, and they'll go from one body to another, to another, to another. Bees do this constantly. They're just hopping body after body after body. From a human perspective, that's terrifying. But from an insect perspective, and we're not here to study insects, but insects are really good at doing this. They'll just hop around and they'll be conscious of it. They're like hopping from one body to the next, the next, the next.
Okay, so I feel a little better now about all the bugs I killed. Okay.
Well, but you didn't kill them. All you did, and we understand. And
Yeah.
this, by the way, in this conversation, we're not saying that this isn't about nihilism, and it's not about narcissism, and it's not even really, for those who know the term, it's not even about solipsism. That's
about what?
The idea that I'm the only one here and nothing else matters.
Okay.
You are the only one here, but everything matters because everything is you. That bug you killed is actually a version of you. But if you take it within the construct of death is the end and final, then of course it's very painful. But death is not the end and it's not final. And you die all the time and you come back. And you're hopping around.
Can you tell us a little bit more about versioning?
To talk about versioning is to talk about imagining. When you're imagining something, you're actually actively living whatever that imagining is. It's happening through another version of you. And all you're really doing when you're imagining something or when you're thinking about something is you're tapping into the experience of another version of you who's right there in it, and they're reporting back to you. But it's not like you don't have any idea of yourself kind of sitting down and like, I have all these versions I need to report to, because your life, you're doing the same thing for others. But that's what imagining is it's versioning. And that's what thinking is, it's versioning. And that's what manifesting is, it's versioning. Manifesting is bringing in from another version of you an idea and then deciding to have it now instead of later, or instead of off to the side. So again, the point of using versioning, there's lots and lots of different things. One is you can always just spin off a version of you in order to have a guide who can help you with a particular process. A really fun thing to do with versioning is to just version an expert. If you're like, going back to cake baking, versioning a person who's really, really, really good at making really rich, really moist cakes that have just like the perfect crumb and that are really decorated quite beautifully. And you can version a version of you who knows how to do that, or someone maybe someone who makes cakes like that, and you can version a version of them and conjure up a version of them to stand with you as you're baking the cake. And if you pay attention, they will talk to you. But this all sounds very like, we know from a logical perspective, this sounds very like pie in the sky or cake in the sky for that matter. But the thing is, this is all really easy and you're doing it already. When you're just daydreaming and you go off somewhere, you're going off to cavort with other versions of yourself. And then you come back, reestablish your manifesting form really easily in the blink of an eye, without any sense whatsoever that you were gone, because all the backstory fills in and you've got the clarity about the permanency and consistency of physical reality, which is really good. And then you go on with whatever you're doing. But you have access to all of this and you can literally conjure up anything. And it's very, very simple. The way we suggest you do it is to just say something like, there's a version of me who, and then you fill in whatever you want. And then pay attention, because you'll feel the presence of this other version of you. If you want to, you don't have to. You can even integrate them. You can actually have them sit down inside of you so that you feel more in alignment with what you've conjured up. Now, all of this stuff is really subtle. There's very little big, huge, waha, woohoo, oh my God, big stuff. It's all very, very subtle. But if you do it and play with it and experiment with it, particularly experiment with it, you'll find that things begin to change, and they will sometimes begin to change a lot faster than you were ever thinking possible. And that brings us to one point that we do like to say, and we know you've heard this many times. Many of our physical friends come to us with a rich background in psychological astuteness. They're very self-aware. They know exactly how they've in the past, why in the past, the impact that shit has had on their life, and why it's a problem. And they'll ask us, I really, and I need this to be solved. And we say, you didn't do anything wrong. and we help them deconstruct that. The psychological astuteness at a certain point is no longer, it's always useful, but it's no longer as useful as it was before. And we're not saying you shouldn't be thinking this way. We're just saying, if you're going to come to us and talk about it, we're going to talk about metaphysics, not the psychological aspect, and certainly not the unconscious mind, because from our perspective, there's no such thing. We haven't found any evidence of it. Everyone is actually quite conscious of what they're doing. They just may not be paying attention. And you may say, well, that sounds unconscious to me, except for the part where it's not. You're still actually actively with it. You just may not be paying attention to it because the way you think is you want to stay on track and online, and you don't have time to be distracted by these other thoughts. And that's another big, huge can of worms. But we thought we'd open it up and let them kind of scatter around and have a look, see what's going on.
Yeah, maybe we'll come back to that can of worms. But the other can of worms I want to go back to right now is, you said you can create this other version of you. So is that the same thing as, oh, I would like to create a version of me that can teach me how to bake a cake?
You can do that. That's the long way around. There's a whole bunch of ways, the reasons for that. And so
what's the short way around then?
There's a version of me with me right now who is a master baker, and I am baking as they bake. There's no teaching. We would not suggest you bring a teacher into the table. You can do so if you want to string it out. But if you have a cake to bake and you want to bake that cake now, you don't have time to be learning anything. You're going to be baking it. Now, we're being a little silly here, but we're trying to get the point across. Conjure up a version of you who is going to come in and actually move through you to bake the cake.
Okay, so I know this is not Matrix movie we're talking about, but it reminds me of the scene in the Matrix where he doesn't know how to fly the helicopter, or was it she and Trinity, and then she just knows how to fly the helicopter and hops in, they fly away. I know it's not apples to apples, but I'm downloading the version of me that knows how to do that cake thing.
You can look at it that way. It still sounds a little too complicated to us. There's a version of me who is a master baker, and I am that version now. But you have to let go. Not covered in the movie, by the way. Not covered in the movie is you have to be willing to let go. You have to be willing.
Yes.
It's not going to take you over. You don't lose primacy. You don't lose agency. What you're doing is adding to yourself, tapping into the mastery of baking that you're conjuring up. And we use that word conjure, not create, conjure, because that's literally what you're doing. You're calling it in, and you're basically just saying, this is it. And it kind of sounds like magic with a K, but it isn't, because it's just really easy and it's very simple. It's also very subtle. That's the important thing to remember. This is all very subtle, and you do this all the time. You just don't necessarily recognize it.
Right.
But yeah, you can be a master helicopter pilot, but you have to be willing to let go. And one of the things we like to say about movies is that they have a dramatic flow that's important. You're in there for 2 hours. They got to get you in, get you into the story, get you engaged, get you going, get you moving, and get going on, and then you got to leave because they got to put other butts in the seat, right? So they want you to come in, have the thing, have the epiphany, have the sad story, and then the triumph, and then boom, you're done. Not really a good example for actually how your life actually works, because your life is actually much faster than a movie and takes a lot longer. And when we say takes a lot longer, what we mean is a movie in 2 hours can cover the entire life of a person. You, however, don't want to spend 2 hours living a life. You want to spend, we would say 80 years, but it's not really 80 years, because the only day you're in is today. And you want to stretch that out or compact it. You can do either one just by saying, I'm stretching it out, and you start feeling your way into stretching it out, or compact it where it moves really fast. You can do either one. But you're not here for the dramatic arc of things. And we're not criticizing what you said. The example is excellent. But downloading seems to us, we could be wrong, just very complicated, because the part that's missing, because it's a movie, is that the willingness to fly the helicopter, which may require some more conjuring. Like, there's a version of me who is really scared, but is now feeling really relaxed, was really scared, is now really relaxed, and is now sitting inside of me, and is now quite confident about the flying of this helicopter. There might be 2 or 3 or 4, because master helicopters don't have time for your shit, because they got a helicopter to fly, but you may still have that you have to deal with. And so you may have various versions that kind of bridge the gap that help you go from like, I need to fly this helicopter, but I'm really scared. Then goes from I'm really scared to I'm getting better, and I'm getting better to I'm more relaxed. I'm more relaxed to I'm more confident. I'm more confident, and now I'm like I know what these controls are. I know what these controls are. I know how to work them. I know how these work, and I can use them. I'm using them, and I'm in the air, and there you are.
Is it?
That's it. Sounds
Yeah.
logical, but
Yeah.
that's not really logic, and it's not a
Yeah.
straight line. But what it does is you're paying attention to where you are, because the other you'll hear us say this, and anyone listening to us will hear us say this. There's a new age component to all of this, and that's a term that we use deprecatingly. If there's nothing wrong with it, but we use it as a deprecating idea because we want to contrast off of it. In the new age, you're supposed to always be getting better, and you're always supposed to be doing more and accomplishing more and getting better at doing whatever it is that you're doing. And we're here to remind you, you're already actually quite masterful at everything you're doing. If you can think of an expert helicopter pilot, then you are one. It's just a matter of being willing to allow it to move through you. That's it. That's what it all comes down to.
So if I were to apply this in my life, let's use a different example, like improv. I just started taking improv classes. So is it like assuming that I am already
Well, actually,
that?
but let's talk about improv. Improv, and there are probably actors and comedians and just different people who've decided that it was fun to do that, who, if they pay attention, improv is actually instruction on how manifesting works.
I know.
Because remember, the number one rule of improv is never say no. Always say yes. Always be saying yes. Always be saying yes. Yes, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, the one person comes in and they're like, "You're the president of the United States," and you say yes, and I'm dead.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're moving. Then like suddenly it's like a ghost conference of presidents of the United States, and there's all these, and then yes, and oh, but it's not that. It's this, and you're constantly adding to, adding to, adding to, adding to. Never deleting, never amending, never going back and correcting, never standing in front of the audience and saying, I am psychologically astute. Let me tell you that's been going on here and how it needs to be cleaned up. Nobody's ever doing that. You just keep moving forward, keep moving forward, keep moving forward, adding, adding, adding. That's what manifesting is. That's what metaphysics is. Because essentially you are a being of light becoming more of yourself. There is no correcting, there is no amending, there is no editing. There's only more. It can look like amending and correcting. It can look like deleting. But as we like to say, there's no trash can in the universe. You can't throw anything away. It's not possible to get rid of things. You evolve, they evolve. And improv is a really powerful way to understand how evolution actually works. You take what you have and then you add to it. And that's what you're doing all the time.
Yeah, and the other thing I find about it, the parallels with how metaphysics and everything, it's like the moment you start to prepare an improv for what you're going to say, it's
You
like
lose the thread.
you lose it. Yeah.
Right. Because what you've done is you stepped out of the flow and you started analyzing the flow.
And that's a beautiful metaphor for life. Like, be in the moment. The moment you step out of the moment, or like right now, when my mind wanders, it's like, oh, bring myself back to the moment. Bring myself back to the
Or
moment,
not. But
or
that's the
not.
other thing. But that's the other thing, because improv. What if what improv ends up becoming, to use that metaphor, is basically people wandering down to the audience and sitting down in chairs in order to become an audience member instead of an actor on the stage. We're not saying you should do that. We're not saying it might work out. It would work out well. But that, if we take that analogy, that's actually what ends up happening, is you do sometimes go into the audience and sit down and watch, and then you sometimes get up and you go back onto the stage. You've done it several times in this conversation. Sometimes you're actively participating and sometimes you're observing. We recommend that when you are coming to us, for example, and you'll hear this a lot, and saying, this is what I'm wanting, and we say, but you're in an observational perspective, which means you're thinking about thinking. You're not actively thinking. And if you're talking with us, we're going to recommend, for the purpose of this conversation, that you be actively, like on stage in the form of improv, where you're doing a lot of yes and, yes and, yes and, yes and.
Yes, and yes.
But it's
Okay.
never, but
Yeah.
you, but
There's nothing
that new
wrong.
age thing of like trying to get better at doing things, and it's not just new age, but it's kind of motivational theory of like, you're supposed to always be improving. That's not what we're ever talking about. You are perfect already. The perfection is
Yeah.
amplifying and expanding.
That's what I like. Yeah, I'm there. It's about being, not doing, to coin another cliche, but really, yeah, it's not about the doing, about the
Well, and
being.
doing is fun and fabulous and amazing, particularly when you're doing something that feels better,
Yes.
but it doesn't define you. It's an extension of what you're being, of what you're feeling, of what you're thinking, of what you're allowing.
Yes. So in terms of versioning, I just had another question about that. Is it like there's all these versions of me? Do they look like me?
Not always. In fact, this is not exactly accurate because, again, there's no way to actually accurately describe this. But every version of you looks a little bit different than every other version of you. But it would take, you would have to be really, really skilled at discerning one human being from another to really be able to see that. And we don't mean different hair color. We mean your nose is a little bit longer or a little bit shorter, or you're a little bit taller or a little bit shorter by like millimeters or even smaller than that. Like very, very subtle, minute things that are slightly different because you're
Mm-hmm.
never a carbon copy. You can't be, because every versioning is an evolution. You're slightly better, but better in logical terms is not what we're talking about. Better in terms of you're more of who you are through the versioning. So if we go back to why this is all happening, you start off as a being of light, just a being of light, no form, no shape. And then contrast arises, and you're like, I want more than just this. And so we like to say, then you imagine a light going through a prism and it scatters into different colors. So it's like freedom, joy, delight, wonder, magic. They're not all the same. They're different. They have different tones. And those are not all of them. But it just goes through this prism, and then those things begin to take, because of your desire and the contrast of that, the fact that there's now all these colors, you want more. And then those colors, they begin to take shape. Those are feelings, those are vibrational frequencies, not to be confused with the radio, but those are vibrational tones. They begin to take on heavier and heavier shape and form. They become thoughts. And then those thoughts eventually become form. Form is the least part of all of this. It's the end of the line. It's what you're extending out to. And then you want to get feedback from the form in order to elicit certain vibrational states within you, not in your body, but within you. And that's the reason why you have all this. And the different versions are different forms of that light, taking different shapes and different forms for different purposes. But every time you have, an easy way to think of a version as not a conscious act, but just kind of a thing that always happens, is when you come to a road and you look and it's straight ahead, left or right, or turn around and go back, that's 4 different versions that can leave that intersection. And there's actually 5, the one that can stand there. And then of course there's 6, the one that never got there, which is actually kind of like a 0 value, but there's even a version like that. The one that's is back at the other block thinking about being there and hasn't gotten there yet. So there's all these different versions, and then they go down and they split off and split off and split off and split off. Not infinitely, but a lot.
A lot.
And the point of this is you becoming more of yourself. You from the point of view of the number one version, that's what we call you, how you identify yourself, like in this conversation. From your number one version, these versions can seem very far away, but they're actually all pretty much sitting right on top of you. You're in the same space, just not the geographic space, not the linear space, not the objective space. But subjectively, you're sitting right in the middle of all of this. You haven't gone anywhere because there's nowhere else to go, because this isn't actually a place. This is a dream, this hologram.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's fantastic. It's
Yeah.
wonderful. And we highly recommend it, because we can't taste chocolate. We don't know what the sunrise looks like, but you do. And it's delightful. And that's why you're doing this. That's why you're taking the time to talk with us, is because you want more of this. And it's not that we have the answer, it's that you're using us to kind of amplify, expand, and deepen what you are relating to in terms of what you're manifesting. And we're delighted to be helping you with this.
Thank you. Yes. All right. Wow, that was already an hour and plus. Is there anything, how can we use this information for versioning? I know that you probably already said it. but
Well,
repetition is a great way to learn. So can you tell us again, how is this versioning? How can we use it to our benefit?
well, we're going to give you 2 for 1. So we'll answer your question, but then there's something else we want to add on. So the answer to your question is there's a version of me right now who is having what I'm wanting. Just define what I'm wanting is. There's a version of me right now who is already in that relationship, and I'm feeling what it feels like. And you can one of the things, one of the exercises you can use that can be very helpful is to imagine that there's a version of you sitting right next to you in another reality. And let's say if you're thinking about a relationship that you're not in, and you lean over, either you can do it physically or mentally or both, and you kind of fall into that version, and you can kind of start smelling and tasting and seeing and hearing and have sensory awareness of what it's like there. That means you're lining up with it, and you come back over to center.
Mm.
You're now in it, and it's in you. You can use that to then further amplify it, because you can say, there's a version of me right now who's in the relationship, and I'm having a wonderful relationship with my wonderful beloved. You begin to say that, you start conjuring up thoughts that begin to amplify themselves, that begin to make themselves present to you, and begin to become aware. You begin to become aware of them, and they begin to amplify. And you start having more and more proof that you're there already. And you can use this to move very quickly into something like that if you want to, but you just keep, like we said before, there's a version of me who needs to fly a helicopter. There's a version of me who's willing to be able to fly one. There's a version of me who's now willing to fly one. There's a version of me who can fly one. There's a version of me who is flying one, like that. And if you pay attention, you can do this really quickly. You're not always going to want to.
Hmm.
And don't beat yourself up if you lose the thread, because it will come back. And that leads us into the second answer. You don't ever really learn anything. Learning is a construct that you taught yourself. If you'll pardon us for using that as a pun. Learning is an idea that you taught yourself that lined up with what you did for like the first 18 to 25 years of your life. For most people, most of the time. And one could say you have a lifetime of learning, and we don't disagree with that. But what's actually happening is you never really need to package anything. If you just realize that, having listened to this conversation today, there's lots of little nuggets that dropped in. Whoever's listening, you will have received them as a result of what you're wanting, and that's very specific to you. You don't have to package them. You can, if you want to sit down and write them out, or kind of do a précis about what happened here, that's fine. But if you just go about your merry way, words that you've heard, ideas that came up as you were thinking about the words you were hearing, they'll come back to you when you're ready for them. Because everywhere, everyone, including your own thoughts in your own mind, are helping you. So you don't need to learn through repetition. If you want to repeat it over and over again, feel free, because it feels better.
Hmm.
But don't do it because that's the way to get there, because there is no way to get there. You're already there. All that's happening is, when it's time, when you're ready, in the way that's right for you, the things that are useful in that moment will rise up to meet you. As you pay attention to what feels better, that becomes really,
Hmm.
really obvious.
Yeah.
So that's the answers.
Yes, pay attention to what feels better, and there's nothing to learn. And if I could use the versioning, and I'm thinking already, like something that I want. Let's say I
And you
want.
already have it, and it's
I
already done.
already have it, and it's
It's
already
already done.
that yes, it's already done.
So there's nothing more to be done. So think about it this way. The version of you who has it, do you think they're sitting around wondering where it's coming from? No, because
No,
they're in it.
because they already have it. Yeah,
Right. That's the version you're moving into.
yeah,
You're becoming that version. Or another way to put it is that they're becoming you, which is a deep metaphysics concept. But to make it really simple, that's who you're becoming. And you can amplify that and speed it up. And here comes the big paradox. You can amplify that and speed it up by not giving a fit whether or not that happens or not. That's the
yeah,
fastest way to get
yeah.
anywhere. As soon as you
That's
decide it
that's the
doesn't matter,
gold right there. That's the gold. Yeah,
right?
yeah. Not caring when it
Because it's
comes or
done.
if it comes. Because,
Because it's done. That's
yeah,
the vibrational state of having something, is you don't care where it's coming or when it's coming, because you already have it. So there's no question about where it's coming or when it's coming or how it's coming. You have it.
very cool. So, is there anything else you want to share with us before I go ahead and bring Frank back? Any
Well,
last? Yeah.
The thing that we like to say each and every time we say it is that you are, of course, a being of light manifesting through form. If you're listening to these words or seeing this video, you're using your eyes and your ears to participate in this conversation. That means you're manifesting. You are a being of light manifesting. You have this body, you have these objects in your physical environment, including this video, whatever device you're using to listen to or watch it on. And it's happening for you, on your behalf, and to your benefit, like every other manifesting thing, which is everything. So you're not alone. You are surrounded by your ideas as extensions of you in different forms and shapes. All is well and is wonderful. This is our favorite thing to say. It's true. It's everything we ever say is all encapsulated here. As wonderful and delightful and delicious as all of this is, it's only getting better and better and better from here.
And so it is. Thank you. Thank you so much. Communion of Light, Paul.
Okay. How was that?
That was great. That was fantastic. Thank you. I want to go ahead and give you a chance to tell everyone how people can find you, even about your event that's coming up. So your website, your event, your books. Go ahead and let people know.
The event that's coming up is happening on November 11th. It's happening in Orlando, and it's an all-day event. There'll be about 5 hours of channeling, and you'll be able to ask any question you want to ask. You can find out more by going to communionoflight.events. The main website for what I do is communionoflight.com. Again, my name is Frank W. Butterfield. And really, if you just go to communionoflight.com, there's everything there. There are about 1,000 sample recordings. I mean, literally 1,000 that you can just rummage through and just find all sorts of good stuff. There are 500 something series archives that go back to 2010. And it's a really fun thing to kind of explore and check out. And I invite you to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited about going to the event. There's quite a few of us going that we are excited. So if anyone listening would like to join us, I would love to see you. So let me know if you're going. And again, all the links are going to be in the show notes. The link to the event, the link to Communion of Light, communionoflight.com. And yeah, it's just a fabulous conversation. And then you have a new series almost every week. Is that correct?
That's right. Not this week, because I'm
not this week.
A week off this week.
Okay.
But yeah, they start on Saturday. They run for 7 days. There's a morning call at 8:05 a.m. Do you know why it's 8:05 a.m., by the way?
Why?
Have you heard the story?
No.
Because I live, so you know about Daytona Beach, and we can drive on the beach here?
Yes.
So the beach opens at 8 o'clock. It gives me 5 minutes to go through the gate and park and set up and do the calls on the beach. I went yesterday. I did one at the beach, and I'll be doing them more and more often there. And oddly enough, the recording acoustics are better when I'm on the beach for some reason.
Really?
Yeah. But that's why it's 8:05. So it's 8:05.
Yeah.
They usually run about, if you want to participate, they run about an hour to an hour and a half. And then you get a recording every day, which has the conversation, sometimes a process, and multiple questions. So it's a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun. Thank you so much, Frank. This has been lovely.
It's been awesome.
Yes.
So honored. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. I really appreciate it. I hope you come on again.
I'd love to.
Awesome. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Frank Butterfield and the Communion of Light. You can find Frank at communionoflight.com. If you're interested in learning more about his upcoming event in Orlando on 11/11, you can go to communionoflight.events. All the links mentioned in this episode will be in the show notes. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to support the show, here are a few ways you can do that. 1. Tell your friends about the deliciousalignment.com/podcast. 2. Share an episode on social media. 3. Sponsor an episode. Contact me for more information about sponsorship opportunities. 4. Leave a review on Apple right on your phone. 5. Subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple, wherever you listen. Or 6. Make a donation. The donation link for the show is in the show notes. And of course, continue to listen and let me know how the podcast is making a difference for you. Till next time, enjoy the deliciousness of life.